Hello, how are you guys doing? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to talk about a couple of topics you've never heard me discuss in the past. We're going to be talking about E3, we're going to be talking about Zelda, and we're going to be talking about a franchise called Metroid. So right now, it's mid-March, which means, in theory, we're about 3 months away from E3 2022 actually happening. And of course, this year, just like most of the past few years, is a bit unique, partly because we expect E3 to happen in digital fashion because we're kind of at what feels like might be the tail end of the pandemic. Obviously, not quite sure. Things could change at any moment, but obviously things are better now than they've been pretty much since it started, at least here in the States where E3 actually happens. But it's also unique because technically the ESA has not actually confirmed the dates for E3, and even though I think it was maybe a month or two ago, they did come out and say it's not supposed to be in person, it's going to be a digital event again. Since then, they seem to have gone silent, and because we don't have the dates, and we haven't heard anything else from them, there is a bit of mystery on if E3 will even happen at all this year. I myself want to believe that at the end of the day it probably will happen, but there is a chance it doesn't, and I wanted to just mention that here at the beginning of the video. But what I want to do is, kind of for the sake of conversation and for the sake of this exact video, let's just assume that E3 will happen in some way, shape, or form, and most of the typical players will be attending or having presentations and showing off new games. And obviously, because on this channel I focus 99% on Nintendo, we would also expect Nintendo to have something to show and play some sort of part, have an E3 direct presentation, show off all sorts of new exciting things like they typically do. And in that kind of vacuum, if we talk about it assuming E3 happens and Nintendo plays a part of it, we then get to wonder about what the big highlights of their E3 Direct presentation are going to be. A lot of questions around the two franchises I mentioned here, Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 and Metroid Prime 4. And so I want to dive deep into what we could expect from these games at E3 and if they'll even be the primary focus of Nintendo's presence. As always, before we dive any deeper into the Metroid and Zelda and E3 topic, I like to remind you guys I'm always trying to grow the channel here on Rule of Two Review. I am less than 2,000 subscribers away from 20,000 subscribers. I really hope to hit that milestone this year in 2022. I upload every single week. I talk about all things Nintendo, I talk about all things Metroid, and I discuss all things gaming. So as you watch this video, if you seem to like what I'm doing and what you hear, then I hope you will consider subscribing to the channel. So, the first thing I want to talk about is Metroid. I just want to jump to the most exciting thing to me, and Metroid's my favorite franchise, Prime 4, my most anticipated game like of all time. You guys know this about me. You come here for Metroid content and my Metroid discussions. And so, yeah, let's just jump right into the good and the most exciting thing, which to me is if Metroid Prime 4, the one Metroid game we know is being worked on, has a chance at showing up at E3. And honestly, my answer is yes, I do think there's a chance it happens. Of course, there have been other rumors and conversations dating back to, like, I want to say 2018, about a Metroid Prime trilogy port to the Nintendo Switch. Most recently, last year, a new conversation and rumor got out there about the idea of, instead of the Prime trilogy getting an HD remaster, instead a full-blown remake of just Metroid Prime 1 may be coming to the Switch, which I've told you guys before is what I would prefer of the two, just for me selfishly, because I've played all three games as is anyway. And because of that, it's worth noting that if Metroid were to even have a presence at E3 for Nintendo, or even if E3 doesn't happen and maybe Nintendo has this weird nebulous summer direct or whatever to kind of take the place of E3 to fill that void, you know, whatever they end up doing, I think they'll have a big summer presence. And if Metroid has a presence at Nintendo's summer presence, there is a chance that instead of Prime 4, we get the Metroid Prime Trilogy HD that we've all wanted for years and have heard about, or even this rumored Prime remake. And I do think that there's potentially some nuggets of truth to both of those things, man. I've said it many times in videos. I've heard things in the past. I do want to believe one of these things is happening. I don't officially know it. I'm not going to tell you anything that I think I know, but I do want to believe that something is happening in terms of bringing prior Metroid Prime games to the Switch. I hope one of them is true. I hope it's the Prime 1 remake, but I won't be sad regardless. And maybe Nintendo is still planning on holding off on Metroid Prime 4 till maybe next year to show it to us for the first time. And if that's the case, then yeah, one of these Prime HD remakes or remasters might instead be shown at E3. And I guess you could argue that if anyone had more of a chance of happening than the other, it probably would be whatever's happening with a Prime trilogy or a Prime remake. That probably has more of a chance of showing up than Metroid Prime 4 does. I get it, you know, I understand these things. I think I would agree with that. But I don't think that Metroid Prime 4 has a 0% chance of showing up. I think there's a great chance it still shows up. In fact, it might even be something where Nintendo just totally Metroid dumps on us and gives us both things. The trilogy remaster or whatever that is, plus a sneak peek at Prime 4 and maybe even a release window or release year. The way they like to give us a teaser or a trailer, and then at the very end of that trailer, the title of the game fades to black, and then out of that blackness fades in the release year. Like with Bayonetta or Breath of the Wild 2's last trailer, and or I think Splatoon 3 did the same thing. And it just fades back in with the year 2022. Or in Metroid Prime 4's case, I would want to believe, fingers crossed, that it would be 2023. I know that at this point, a lot of my fellow Metroid fans, or even just Nintendo and gaming fans who are excited about Metroid Prime 4, I know that a lot of us get frustrated or aggravated at the mystery around the game, and some people never really accepted the restart that happened in 2019 as a reason to be so silent on the game. I don't feel that way. To me, it makes complete sense, and I also do not want this game rushed. I want it to be perfect. So, I mean, it hurts to wait, but I certainly don't mind waiting because I want the game to be perfect. But I can also acknowledge that for a lot of people, it's like, come on, Nintendo, where is this game? You announced it too early. It's been so long, and it's time to release it, you know? Release it on the Switch. Don't wait for it to be next gen, and all these different things that I think we've all seen people say. But what I want to do is remind you guys of some of the things and theories that I've had about Metroid Prime 4 in the past, and, you know, I'm gonna revisit that time-honored topic on this channel. Remember, if anything ever comes true from this, that I know I was the first person to start believing in this in early 2020 when no one even had a glint in their eye about this idea. But you guys who know me know my opinions here. I am predicting that next year in 2023, we will get the next Nintendo hardware. Something that either qualifies as next gen based on the power and library that the system is capable of, or something that Nintendo just flat out tells us is their next gen console, a Switch 2 or a new thing, whatever it is. And because I think that, you know, maybe late next year, you know, around 2 years or so from right now, the end of 2023, if my prediction is true, and we do see that next Nintendo hardware release, I also think that releasing Metroid Prime 4 is a great game to showcase some of that new console's abilities and power, and I think there's a great chance that they would release it cross-generationally on both the Switch and on their next console, if in fact it all happens at the same time. You know, I'm only guessing, I could be wrong, but if my guess is correct, to me it all makes sense, and I think things could line up perfectly. And so, not to mention, not only could Metroid Prime 4 potentially showcase the power of the new console if they make that next-gen version actually suited to that, you know, make it take advantage of the next console's power, but it could also be one of those games that helps sell the new machine, right? I mean, having a killer app at launch is a great thing to do. And while Zelda was a killer app more of a killer app for the Switch than Prime 4 would be for the next console, I still think Prime 4 could be that. And we also can't forget that we're coming off of the hype of Metroid Dread. That game is only like, what, 5 months old at this point or something? And we know it's done extremely well for itself. It's done extremely well for the Metroid franchise. It also reviewed fantastically. Everyone who's played it has loved it. You know, the Metroid franchise feels back in such an amazing way that we never thought would happen. And so all of these things, between when I think it would release and the Metroid Dread hype and, you know, Retro Studios, of course, updating their banner with the first official art of Samus we've seen since they took over. I made 2 very long videos about that. I think that it could make perfect sense for Prime 4 to show up at E3 for Nintendo. Now, Zelda, of course, finds itself in a slightly better scenario, and I know it's kind of funny because my first video this year before I took my 2-month break from YouTube was actually about the state of both Metroid Prime 4 and Breath of the Wild 2 in 2022, and I know I touched briefly on E3 here and there in that video, so it's funny to be doing kind of a similar video, but I think focusing these two games more directly on the E3 week or the E3 Direct, I think is slightly different. But I do want to say that with Breath of the Wild 2 being more of a real game, and a game that we've seen 2 teaser trailers for, they've even given us a release year of this year in 2022, it's hard to imagine if the game isn't slipping until next year, which might happen, because since my first video of the year, we've had some new information and game reveals that changes the potential landing date for Breath of the Wild 2. If it's going to actually stick to this year, I think that this could be the year for them to finally blow the doors open at E3. Now, of course, the big X factors with Breath of the Wild 2, like I was just mentioning, is the fact that since, January 3rd, I think when I posted my video about Metroid and Zelda in 2022, we've had both the confirmation and reveal of brand new Pokemon games that are scheduled for late 2022 or holiday 22, whatever it said there. And then, of course, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 was also just announced a couple of weeks ago for September 2022. So that same holiday fall shopping season time of year, right? And this was even brought up on my last video where I was reading some of your guys' predictions from Twitter. And someone called out this exact thing. Currently, we could assume that new Pokemon games, new Xenoblade, and Breath of the Wild 2 might all be releasing in the holiday shopping season in 1 year, 2022. And if that's the case, that's 3 massive franchises, massive open world games. How many big games are releasing in the same genre for one platform that could end up cannibalizing each other's sales potentially? And it's like, I thought maybe Zelda and Pokemon could release at the same time, but once I was reminded about Xenoblade also coming out around that time, that further makes me think that there's a chance that Zelda might be the game Nintendo chooses to push back to next year. Which could be A, because the game's not ready, or B, also because so many games at one time, and Zelda becomes a great game to signify an entire console's great year in 2023. But I like to play the optimist here, and I just want that game this year. I mean, I want Zelda so badly. I am ready for the next Zelda adventure. Breath of the Wild was incredible. Then we got Metroid Dread, so that satisfied my Metroid fix for a little bit longer. Now we can come back. We're staggering Zelda, Metroid, Zelda. Now let's come back to Breath of the Wild 2 and let's get that puppy out, man. We know it's closer to being done than Metroid. We've seen gameplay, we've seen story, we've seen stuff. They gave us a year of this year. And, I want them to stick to 2022, and so I want, okay, in a perfect world, my favorite game, Metroid Prime 4, would be the prime focus of E3. But let's be real, I don't expect that. Even if they do talk about or show Metroid Prime 4 at E3, I don't think it's going to be the all-encompassing presence for them this year. I think that's what Zelda does. Zelda fits that bill more than Metroid, I can admit it, even though Metroid's my favorite franchise. And so let's do a smaller version repeat of 2016 where Breath of the Wild took over their entire E3, and let's do a similar version and have a huge focus on Breath of the Wild 2 at E3 this year with several treehouses and even maybe a unique presentation. Let's give us that title, let's show us the gameplay, let's give us a release date. Let's do all that stuff and just blow the doors wide open on Breath of the Wild 2. Of course, there's a chance that neither of these happen. Maybe Metroid Prime 4 isn't at E3. Maybe Breath of the Wild 2 is also not at E3. Maybe even a Prime Trilogy or whatever. Maybe none of that stuff shows up. And I think a lot of us would be pretty disappointed if that happens. I don't think that's going to happen. I think one or both of these games has a chance at being discussed at E3 for a variety of reasons, many of which I talked about here. We of course then just go back to E3 in general and we ask ourselves, will E3 happen? Will any sort of event or week that is branded as E3 actually occur where all of the gaming companies and all the gaming industry, Nintendo included, come together throughout that week to show us new stuff and do interviews and have presentations and new game trailers and, tree houses from Nintendo about things? Is that going to happen? And I mean, we don't know. It's like I said in the beginning here, we don't have the date. They told us a couple of months ago they were going to do another digital show, But they've then gone silent and they haven't given us dates. We're only 3 months away from when we would assume it would happen in mid to late June. So, like, what's going on? Like, is E3 just not going to happen this year? I don't know why they wouldn't do it. In 2020, it made sense because the pandemic came out of nowhere and changed the entire planet for that year. And it was so new and it was so scary and it was even more contagious and more people were getting affected by it and losing their lives. And it was a terrible, horrible, scary time. We all know that. We all lived through that. But that was 2020. Then they came back last year and gave us an okay week, you know, for E3, and Nintendo themselves had a really fantastic showing at E3 last year. So this year, I would love to see them come back. I don't know why they wouldn't do it. I think they would get great viewership. I think Nintendo knows it's a great time for people to pay attention to them, which is why I think they would probably do a direct even if there is no E3. So, I don't know. Only time will tell. I'm just kind of spitballing my ideas and my desires, but I think E3 might happen. I think Nintendo will be there, and I think Breath of the Wild 2 and maybe Metroid Prime 4, they just might be there. And so these are just my thoughts and predictions, man, and why I think there's a chance one or both of these games end up dominating Nintendo's E3. I could be wrong, but this is what I want to believe. So tell me what you think about my thoughts below. Share your own thoughts and predictions. And with that, this video is a wrap. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Rule of 2 Review, and I'll catch you next time on another video. Bye-bye.